It's 3 minutes after 10 and I have got a problem. It is happening. I guess it was perhaps inevitable. From the moment that Nigel Farage turned up in Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars and started filming people coming in on small boats, people who constitute a tiny, tiny, tiny proportion of our overall immigration figures, and of whom, I think last time I checked, over 70% end up having their asylum applications approved. The narrative has been successfully, just as the narrative of European Union membership was successfully manipulated. The nation was successfully gaslit into believing lots and lots of things that weren't true. And the problem I've got is that I don't know how you deal with it. It's tempting to ignore it, isn't it? It's tempting to ignore the people who scream daily about one tiny aspect of our immigration situation and provide absolutely none of the facts that are necessary to forming an informed, evidence-based opinion. If we've learned anything in the last 10 years, it is what can happen when you have strong and pungent opinions that are not rooted in reality. That is when, I think, the really bad stuff happens. Do you remember? I'm haunted by the thoughts of a caller. Did we clip it up? I'm haunted by the memory of a caller from about, in my mind, it's about 3 months ago. And he said, I've got very strong opinions. And I said, oh, that's interesting. What are they based on? He said, it's not my job to base them on something. Do you remember that? I can't quite remember it. I think he speaks for a huge swathe of the population. And I don't know what to do about it. I mean, for an easy life, we could just ignore it, couldn't we? Together, you and I, plenty of other people on LBC will be wanging on about it forever. Again, possibly contributing to the problem that I'm about to describe to you rather than seeking to solve it. But do you surrender? Do you give up? Do you roll over? Do you choose the easier life? Because that way, madness lies. You ignore the facts and you leave the field free for the people who deliberately warp understanding and deliberately gaslight nations, then the really bad stuff happens. Have you seen the figures for Brexit? It's quite an apt moment, actually, to remind you of what happens when people actually get to see the rabbit, when people actually get to unwrap the box that has been placed under their Christmas tree by the likes of Boris Johnson and his mates. You actually get to see what's inside it, and support for not being in the European Union anymore plummets to, I think, about a third. And that is the problem I've got this morning. I don't know that there'll ever be an equivalent for immigration facts, immigration figures. And I know, listen, it's a really fertile ground to scream fear, to explain. Some people have even let the mask slip on occasion and revealed that they are in the business of selling fear, of scaring people regardless of the facts. But it sells newspapers. It brings in television audiences. It brings in radio audiences. Not the biggest, of course. That's us. But it does nonetheless bring in radio audiences. It delivers a frisson that you can't really deliver with the facts. How many times have I said to you that the queue for the ghost train will always be 100 times longer than the queue for the weight machine, the speak your weight machine? And it just is. It just is. Some people know it. Some people cling to the knowledge that they are peddling lies because it is a very good career. It's very lucrative. Some people are absolutely falling for an incredibly widespread propaganda campaign. And it's not born of racism every time. I mean, there's a heck of a lot of racists up to their neck in this kind of stuff, but it's not born of racism. It's born of clicks and giggles. That gets a bigger following. That gets a bigger response. Everybody's pouring over numbers. It used to be circulation figures. Now it's going to be online activity. What's getting the biggest responses? What's getting the biggest numbers? We're an unfashionable bunch on this programme, is that we always speak our minds and shoot from the hip and hope that things prove popular. What we don't do is have a look at what's popular and then seek to emulate or repeat it. But that is a position of privilege. I've been here for a very long time. And what has drawn my attention this morning is this. I'll give you this juxtaposition of headlines in Rupert Murdoch's Times newspaper. Half of Britain's back ending immigration and deporting recent arrivals. That's the news story, okay? And it's true. Let's be under no illusions about that. That is true. Half of Britain's back ending immigration and deporting recent arrivals. Okay? If it's a headline that you don't like and it's based upon polling, you can, of course, say, well, no one asked me, or how can they possibly get a valid response from a sample of X thousand people? That the science of polling is fairly well established. And while it's not infallible, it is largely reliable. It is the best available guide of what the public think about things. And this headline is true. Half of Britain's back ending immigration and deporting recent arrivals. But when you read into the research by YouGov, you make some discoveries that are not reflected in the top headline. I don't know if you heard yesterday's show when Sam Friedman, former education panjandrum, explained to us how the newspapers were misleading you about private schools. You have a headline saying 50 private schools have closed since new Labour's VAT rules came in. But as you read down that article, you would have discovered, if you were relying on the facts rather than the frightening headlines, that the number of private schools in this country has risen in total since that VAT rule was brought in by about 35, and that the number of private schools that shut every year before and after Labour's VAT changes was around 50. So you see what I mean about manipulating or misleading or even straight up lying to people. Because this is the headline and it is true. I have to keep coming back to that point. Half of Britain's back ending immigration and deporting recent arrivals. And then you read into the second bit. The research also suggests that the public is misinformed about the nature of migration to the UK, with many overestimating the proportion coming illegally. Now, I mean, even I, as someone who does this stuff for a living, albeit that I find it hard to zone in on this particular issue every single day in a way that people who are peddling perhaps the propaganda that creates this misinformation and creates this misunderstanding seem to relish. It's a simple misconception of scale. Over nearly half, 47% of respondents believe that the immigration to the UK is primarily illegal rather than legal. So you've got half of the population, almost enough to win a referendum, who believe that people here illegally, and remember that is a challengeable phrase because it's only relatively recently that we've started describing refugees and asylum seekers who can only come here via irregular routes, i.e. by crossing the channel in small boats, as illegals. There is a technical defence of the use of that word, but there's no moral defence of it. It is the only way that a genuine refugee or asylum seeker can make their way to the UK. So we find ourselves in this absolutely ludicrous situation where people are being described as illegal up until the point that their asylum application has actually been processed, at which point they become entirely legal. How many people even understand that simple nuance, that simple wrinkle? So about half of the public believes illegal immigration, whatever they think that means, is much higher than legal. It's about 4%. I'm going to say that again. I'm not suggesting that you need to be absolutely comfortable with that figure or that it's good news. It doesn't bother me particularly, but I fully accept that if you are absolutely outraged by the prospect of people in this country who've come via irregular routes, then 4% is far too high. But how the hell does half of the country end up thinking that 4% is more than 96? So 96% of people who have arrived in this country in the year to March arrived regularly or legally. 4% arrived irregularly, or if you prefer, illegally. Listen, I don't think there's much point me talking to you if you just want to poo-poo the numbers. That's fine. I get it. You have to carry on believing whatever it is that you want to believe, regardless of the facts and evidence. But take some comfort from the fact that newspapers, including Rupert Murdoch's Times, choose to report this under the headline, half of Britain's back-ending immigration and deporting recent arrivals, because that's made to make you feel better about the fact that you're being lied to, or at least, at the very, very least, you're being hideously misled. But that headline is designed to make you feel better because there are people at the Times who have been, shall we say, complicit in the process of gaslighting an entire population. I can't believe the numbers. 4%. 4%. People have been persuaded that 4% is bigger than 96%. And of that 4%, about 86% of 4% arrived via the small boats. So it is a large percentage of a tiny fraction that have informed almost all of the discourse, both in public and in the media, about the issue of immigration that I can remember seeing since he turned up in Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars and his determination to find something else to scare people rigid with as Brexit began to fall apart. It's extraordinary, right? And, of course, he's just one man, albeit he's a man who does occasionally tell you the truth.
Anyone that thinks politics isn't about sales doesn't understand politics. You know, it is about sales, of course it is. It's about selling ideas. It's about selling ideas, it's about selling hope, it's about sometimes selling fear. I mean, they're the things that make politics work.
Just caught himself there, didn't he? Because you could hear him swallowing the word fear. He thought, oh, rats, I've said it out loud. Have another listen to that and then listen for the swallow towards the end.
Anyone that thinks politics isn't about sales doesn't understand politics. You know, it is about sales, of course it is. It's about selling ideas. It's about selling ideas, it's about selling hope, it's about sometimes selling fear. I mean, they're the things that make politics work.
No mention of facts, no mention of statistics, no mention of numbers, no mention of honesty, decency, improvement to people's lives. It's all about sales. It's all about hope. It's not, though, is it? It's all about fear. How do you frighten people? Does the truth matter? Of course it doesn't. 47% of respondents believe that there is way more illegal immigration than legal, when the real figure is 96% versus 4%. That is the mark of a failed state almost, isn't it? I saw a message this morning pointing out or describing this as a huge failure of the political class and a huge failure of the media. And it occurred to me as I read those words that it was actually a huge success. Huge swathes of the political class, including that fella. That was a clip from a documentary called Nigel Farage, The Man Who Made Brexit, which was originally broadcast on Channel 4 in 2020, although, of course, he's successfully managing to wash his hands of responsibility for that debacle now, even as, to return to some statistics, the number of people who support it has plummeted. And the media class have contributed to this almost unbelievable, what are you going to call it, a knowledge gap? I like the phrase contempt for the con-men, compassion for the con. You know that I do, and I will cling to it until my dying day. I'll cling to it until my dying day, because I watch it happen on a daily basis. I watch it happen in real time. I listen to it happen. The effort put into persuading people of things that aren't true. Just a tiny example, that private school story yesterday. And a lot of the time, the people doing it don't even know that they're doing it. It's a bit like asking a leopard to change its spots, if you like. But this is serious. We've seen what happens when we let these liars and charlatans hold the floor, hold the room. We end up leaving the biggest single market in the history of humanity and sailing solo into an uncertain and increasingly dangerous world. And it's happening again. And there is no more powerful proof than the fact that the public believe things that are absurdly untrue. I mean, monumentally untrue, almost unbelievably untrue. And those are the people that want to see the mass deportations, and those are the people that want to see the cessation of all immigration, and those are the people who are, if you like, the sons and daughters of Brexit, the grandsons and granddaughters of Brexit. They've moved on from wrecking the country as a consequence of one massive lie perpetrated on them by people who flee the scene of the crime before the flames have even died down, onto the next massive lie, which is here, which we are now seeing the evidence of. We are seeing the evidence of what happens when people are fed an unleavened diet of misinformation and or propaganda. They end up believing things that are catastrophically untrue. And it is what people believe. And it's scary, right? I mean, that's why sometimes I wonder whether we should be talking about this stuff more. The more poison is being injected into the bloodstream of a population, surely those of us in the business of providing antidotes should be working ever harder. But how do you deal with this? How do you address this? How the heck do you address the fact that a third of the population believe the number of illegal migrants entering the UK is, quotes, much higher, end quotes, than the number of legal migrants? The numbers are completely contradictory of the claims. How do you deal with it? So there are two questions, okay? 0345 6060 973 are the numbers that you need. And don't shoot the messenger. If you're desperate to believe that this problem is much bigger than it really is and you don't want to be comforted or informed, then that's absolutely fine. But you're listening to the wrong radio programme. Loads of places you can go to have your prejudices inflamed now on a daily basis. This just isn't one of them. Because the question I've got is this, and you might think the answers to this are obvious, but they're not. How has this happened? 0345 6060 973. Have we learned nothing from Brexit? Did Magna Carta die for nothing? How has this happened? How have we ended up living in a country where people haven't just got things a little bit wrong about immigration? They've got things wrong by a scale that is actually visible from space. They think that there are more people coming irregularly than regularly when the real ratio is 4% to 96%. How the hell has that happened? 0345 6060 973. That is question number one, and it's crucial, and we have to ask it, even if it means opening up opening up sores, festering sores of hatred and self-promotion from people who probably know that they're lying to people but are too busy counting votes and bank balances to care. They lied about Brexit and now they're lying about this. And then the second question, which I don't think you can answer, but we can try together, right? We can have a swing at it, even if we don't come up with any definitives. What the heck can we, stroke anyone, do about it? Well, how do you even begin to push back against such epic evidence of a gaslit nation? We are a gaslit nation. And the gaslighters are on the march, probably popping up on LBC again next week to take your calls. And what they are peddling is categorically untrue. You've got the law and order stuff. While I'm on the subject of Farage, here is a man who doesn't think that the voters of Essex should be told that their candidate has been banged up for battering a woman, but who thinks he can somehow cast himself as a paragon of law and order. It's hilarious if it was happening in another country. You'd marvel at it. You'd think that they controlled all the media. The people who are simultaneously claiming that they care about law and order while also claiming that the voters of Essex shouldn't be told that the candidate they've put up to stand has been banged up for battering an ex-girlfriend. It is insane. But it all feeds into the question, what on earth can you do about it? So how has this happened? 0345 6060 973. I wonder if you've got the whatever it is you would need to tell me how you think you've ended up believing such absolute nonsense. And how on earth do you push back? 0345 6060 973. And remember, these are the people who've peddled these lies, the people who have gaslit the nation, are the same people who are praying for riots on your streets, not their streets. Don't get me wrong, they're not expecting any violence or difficulty in the corners of the country where they reside, but they're praying for violence on your streets. They're lionising and championing people who have literally called for pogroms while other members of this population were setting fire to hotels full of humans. They are praying, they are begging, they are almost salivating at the prospect of more violence. And they have gaslit this nation. How?